Hello, good people, and welcome to Hillbilly Cat History. Signed, sealed, remembered, Hollywood filming. We've been traveling along with Elvis as he's gone from the Circle G in Mississippi to Graceland in Memphis to the airport, all the way to Hollywood, where he had an accident, hurt his head, but now he's back on the set and he's filming Clambake. And that's the story we're going to get into today. Just as soon as we come back from this song, Trust in Motion.
Radio static, Memphis bound, WABQ homes a sacred sound. Green, green grass, again and again. A DJ's risk for a loyal friend. Elvis smiles, no words exchanged, just a test of love on a range. Keys in the dark, showroom glow, a Cadillac waits in a silent show. Merry Christmas, GK said, a yellow chariot, tears on shade. What's fame and fortune worth, my friend, if it's not something we can lend? The Chevy Impala, still shining new, passed from blind to the Circle G crew. Gary Pepper wheels instead of rays, rode the road with Elvis in his face. Sterling drove it, errands and guard, a father's devotion, quiet and hard. He couldn't walk, but he moved the crowd, fancy and twisted, but faintness allowed. No car was filtered, no machine spin, just careless truth from deep within. A house still burning, a pen like flame, a heart that never saw a grave. Keys in the dark, guess that road from Cadillac dreams to a humble home. Elvis gave money, chrome and steel. He gave his friends a way to feel. What's fame and fortune, what can you see, if it's not shedding loyalty?
Thank you all for gathering here at Hillbilly Cat History, where we remember together and listen for the echoes. Hi, Keith. Hi, Marion. Hi, Colleen. Hi, Anna. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. And we're going to dive back in to Elvis as he films the movie Clambake. And we know that when we start up at the left top corner of this calendar, Sunday the 26th, that's the day Dr. Nick entered the picture. And on the 27th, Dr. Nick traveled to Graceland delivered the letter, a copy of the letter, to Elvis that he had sent to the colonel that stated that Elvis had saddle sores and we're going to delay the production of clam bake because Elvis can't travel at this moment. And then Dr. Nick really stepped out of the picture, and he was gone from Elvis's life for a fair period after that. So he was really only with him for those 2 days, the 26th and the 27th. Elvis stayed at the Circle G that week, and on the 5th, on Sunday, he traveled by plane to Hollywood. During that week, he had an accident, probably early in the morning on the 9th. We've seen pictures of Elvis going to the studio from a couple of weeks later, but he's leaving at 6:30 a.m. So we can kind of assume he was probably going to leave at 6:30 a.m. on the 9th. And his accident may have occurred when he got up that morning, sometime around 5:30, depending on how much time he wanted in the bathroom. And then Priscilla reports she heard him fall, and it all started from there. And if you're wondering, was Priscilla really there? Check out all the past episodes, because we've had a long discussion about it, and we've seen evidence both ways. And then they had this massive meeting on either the 11th or the 12th, but probably the 11th, where the colonel laid down the law that from now on, Joe Esposito would be in charge. He's the foreman. Marty Lacker is demoted. He will be in charge of special projects, but he will not have access to the checkbook. And the special project he's working on is Elvis's upcoming wedding. And the third rule or law or edict is that there will be no more spiritual questing. There will be no more cluttering up of Elvis's mind with books or talk about spiritual subjects. And with that edict, Larry is relegated, Larry Geller, Elvis's hairdresser, he's confined to only hairdressing. And he begins to notice he's never alone with Elvis. But he doesn't notice this immediately because Elvis and Billy Smith, his cousin, are in Elvis's room at Rocca Place from basically the 9th. The meeting takes place in the bedroom. So for the 9th, the 10th, the 11th, the 12th, the 13th, the 14th, the 15th, the 16th, the 17th, the 18th, maybe the 19th, or massive portions of the 19th, as Elvis readies himself that Sunday, the 19th, to return to work on the 20th. And that's when he reports back to film clam bake. But on the 19th, the Elvis radio network also takes over the country. And on at least 276 stations, they play gospel songs, brand new recordings from Elvis that are on his How Great Thou Art album, which itself will go on to win a Grammy. So very important moment in Elvis's life. Never really been done before or since. Some people said the Colonel bought time on the radio stations, but they sure provided a lot of support to have also bought the time, because RCA printed records, special records, and sent to all these radio stations that included the breaks that they would need to play their own local ads, especially for local charities. 3 minutes were set aside for local charities. So Elvis and the Colonel, they did a lot of good that day. They spread the word and they did a lot of good for charities because that album also included an ad for the Red Cross, a national ad. So we can only guess how many people Sunday the 19th, the day of the Elvis radio network, how many people it helped. We can only guess. But then Elvis returns to filming Clambake full force the 20th through the 24th. Of course, they have the weekends off. So he would have been off the 26th and the 27th. Well, I got those dates wrong. The 25th and the 26th. He would have returned to work on the 27th. This is the special record that RCA printed, sent to the DJs, the radio stations, for the Elvis Radio Network for Sunday the 19th. The following Sunday, that's Easter. So that was the 26th. And this is a beautiful picture of Elvis that went out in different magazines and fanzines that he had signed that said Easter greeting, Elvis Presley, 1967. And when he returned to work, somebody snapped a picture of him on the morning of the 27th, 6:30 a.m. That's how we knew. 6:30 a.m. is when Elvis leaves for work. Probably leaves for work that time every day when he's filming. I believe this is a picture from the same moment, really. In Elvis's car, we can only see one passenger door on the rear, but that is a beautiful door. It has a special curve to it. I mean, this is a very luxurious and special car, even though we can only see just a little bit of it. Okay. So let's talk about what happened during the filming of Clambake. Elvis and the guys, they participated in pie throwings, firecracker fights, and water bombardments. So Elvis had been dragged away from the Circle G, where these guys were having a lot of roughhouse fun. But they brought that roughhouse fun with them to the sets. And they're pie throwing, they got firecracker fights going on, and water bombardments. Now, what seems a little odd about this is that Priscilla has mentioned that everyone, herself and everyone on the sets, everyone that works with Elvis in any capacity, has noticed that Elvis has become very withdrawn and inward ever since he met Larry Geller and they began reading spiritual books and having spiritual conversations together. But here, during the filming of Clambake, people noticed that these guys were throwing pies at each other, they're having firecracker fights, and throwing water balloons at each other. So, is it true that Elvis was more inward? Had he changed back to the way he was just for this movie? Or had that happened? Was he this way in all the movies? We haven't really looked at any of the other movies. So as a group, we don't really know. But we do know that there's lots of rumors throughout all of Elvis's movie career that he and the guys got up to a lot of somewhat childish hijinks, like throwing pies, like firecracker fights, and like throwing water balloons. And here he's doing it. But we were told by Priscilla that Larry's had a very changing effect on Elvis, and that he's not like the guy that he was. Now, Red West says, we sure did cut up on clam bake, but I don't think we held up production any. We didn't cost anybody any money. Red's telling us that they've been on a lot of these movie sets. Clam bake isn't the first rodeo for any of these guys. They've all done this before. They are aware of what costs money to the production and what doesn't. And in the early days, they did cost the production some money. Well before clam bake. But now, their fun is ritualized into the production. So they know, and the crew knows, the moments when these guys can get up to whatever they're doing. And now it's become part of the rhythm, and it's actually everyone has fun with it. Not just the guys in Elvis, but everyone in the crew. Now, Larry Geller says, the Colonel's edict had come down. I was forbidden to be alone with Elvis for even a second. Whatever time I spent with Elvis had to be chaperoned by one of the guys. So was there an edict from the Colonel that came down other than no more conversations about spiritual stuff and no more books? Did the Colonel tell all the guys that Larry was forbidden to be alone with Elvis? Well, no one reports that, other than Larry has that feeling. The others report that Larry's never alone again with Elvis, but they don't report they were told to make sure that happened. It just kind of happened. And some of the way that would have happened is Elvis would be getting his hair done, there'd be another guy in there, and Elvis would not start talking about spiritual stuff, and he would not ask the other guy to leave. But I don't think he ever said, hey, don't leave me alone with Larry Geller. And I don't think the Colonel told anybody that, and I'm not sure that any of the guys would have followed an edict from the Colonel about who they could and couldn't associate with. Don't know if that would have happened, other than they didn't like Larry anyway, so they might have gone along with that because it suited themselves. But like if Red had been put on a list of do not talk to Red because the Colonel said so, I kind of feel like every guy there would have gone up and talked to Red. Don't know for sure. That test never happened for them, but I don't think the Colonel had the edict. So these are Larry's feelings. Larry is noticing that he's never alone with Elvis, and it's bothering him a lot. Hi, Linda Jewell. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. Now, Priscilla Presley says, Elvis promised the Colonel he wouldn't spend any more time than he had to with Larry. We have Priscilla telling us this, but how does she know this? Did she hear Elvis promised the Colonel this? Did Elvis tell her he did that? Did the Colonel tell Priscilla that Elvis promised me that he wouldn't spend any more time than he had to with Larry? Now, we heard earlier in a previous episode that Priscilla had said that after the meeting, and she didn't specify when, so it could have been days later, but she kind of implied it happened soon after the meeting on the 11th or 12th, whichever day it occurred, that the Colonel advised Elvis to spend a lot less time with Larry. And so this promise to spend less time with Larry somewhat connected to that earlier story. So she's kind of indicating that after the meeting, Elvis promised after a discussion with the Colonel that he would spend less time with Larry. But we're not actually sure Priscilla was even there, because the other information we have is that she flew back from Memphis, or she flew from Memphis to Hollywood on the night of March 11th, would have arrived early in the morning, March 12th, in Hollywood. So if they'd had the meeting that day, then she would have been there. But if it had been the day before, then she wouldn't have. But maybe Elvis made this promise on Sunday. I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities here. But you have to decide whether you believe what Priscilla has stated through the story so far, and also weigh it through the lens that we know Priscilla doesn't like Larry. And Red West, he recalls that in one scene, Bill Bixby was before the cameras. Now, Bill Bixby is the co-star in this movie with Elvis, the male co-star. And Bill, he's famous from later in the 1970s. He played Dr. David Banner, who would turn into the Incredible Hulk on the television series The Hulk. Before that, he was famous from being on another television series called My Favorite Martian. So a lot of people remember him from My Favorite Martian. But I think the majority of people on Earth today remember Bill for being the Incredible Hulk. Now, Lou Ferrigno was the guy that actually wore the green makeup and the ripped up shirts. And he was the Hulk. But Bill was his alter ego who would turn into the Hulk. And he would wear special contact lenses that I heard were very painful. But he's a well-known actor. He's got great timing, great comedy timing. But he can also do a dramatic role, has a lot of range. Elvis probably liked him because he was kind of hip at the time. And he seemed like an easygoing and a fun guy. And what Red West says is in one scene, Bill Bixby was before the cameras, which were rolling. And Elvis just walked right into the scene and hit him with a cream pie. Bill followed this up in another scene with something that really broke us up. There was a girl in this scene who had been a dancer. She wore a two-piece swimsuit. As the cameras were rolling, Bill simply undid her halter and her top fell off and her chest fell out. The camera got it all. So Red tells a story where Bill is a little less than a gentleman, in this particular story, I was somewhat shocked to hear that Bill had done this on set to a female in front of a lot of males. I don't know if this is how Bill normally acted on set, or if he felt such a need to try to impress the king of rock and roll, who had hit him in the face with a cream pie, like in the Three Stooges. If you've ever seen the Three Stooges, they hit each other in the face with cream pies all the time. This would have been very similar. Bill wouldn't have been expecting it, wouldn't have known what was happening, and Elvis puts a cream pie right into his face. And then this is how Bill thinks, I'll pull a practical joke on Elvis. And I think it was really poor taste on Bill's part. But Red made sure that he told us all the story so that it got printed somewhere. I do not know who that dancer was. Now, Steve Dunleavy. And Steve Dunleavy is the guy who worked with Red West to author the book Elvis, What Happened? The book that Red and Sonny and Dave Hebler published, and that came out just a week or so before Elvis passed away, and then was reprinted. And Steve Dunleavy was on interviews the night Elvis passed away, pushing the book and his theories about why Elvis died, even though he didn't have a clue. Steve Dunleavy is a muckraker who he was a tabloid journalist at best. And Marion says maybe the incident that Red described was the other way around. And I think you're saying that maybe Red West was the one who actually did the halter, who undid the lady's halter. I think that has a very high possibility of being true. And now that you say that, that would fit very well with Red's personality. But it is shocking about Bill. It's just shocking. But maybe that's the way Bill was. I don't know a lot about him. I just know him from My Favorite Martian and The Hulk. He also did a special about Elvis's death, and it was not good. It pushed a lot of theories that were very not right, and it followed the Geraldo path. So I was also disappointed with Bill about that. I've always been disappointed about that. But at the same time, Bill seemed to really need work and money at the time. And there was such a lack of information to the public about what was happening that I don't know what Bill personally thought about the information that he was putting out into the public about that. And we'll eventually get there in the mystery of August 16th, 1977, and then we can all make a judgment together. But that's who Bill Bixby was. Steve Dunleavy, on the other hand, he knew what he was doing. He knew the whole time. And Linda says Bill Bixby was in the courtship of Eddie's father. Yep, that's right. And Linda's saying it was the show that Bill did was about if Elvis was alive. And yes, that was it. But it played into sensationalistic elements and stuff. It was basically a tabloid show. And so a lot of the greats, the people that I really liked in the acting field and such, a lot of them, as they grew older, they fell. And somebody that I'm thinking of here is Tony Curtis. Do you know Tony Curtis's career at all? He was on top of the world at one point. Elvis admired him greatly. But by the end of his life, he seemed to be always in the need for money. Or he was still looking to be in front of the camera. I don't know what it was, because I don't know Tony Curtis very well either. I just know that he appeared in a lot of commercials on television in the 1980s, which is not where most actors would want to be. And I kind of feel like Bill was moving in that direction. Now, Bill, unfortunately, passed away far too early. And Marion's agreeing that this story about Bill is shocking. So you never know what you're going to learn here at Hillbilly Cat History. So if you learned something new today, make sure you like, you subscribe, you tell everybody that you know that loves Elvis to be sure to join us here at Hillbilly Cat History so we can all learn these surprising and sometimes shocking stories together. And Steve Dunleavy says, at one stage, Colonel Tom Parker must have sensed Presley's disaffection for the kind of work he was doing, although he was being miserable all the way to the bank. As a gesture, or perhaps a gift of appreciation for Presley's fortitude in bearing the junk he was being served up, the Colonel gave him a black Lincoln limousine. Now, in the book, Elvis, What Happened, Steve links this is Steve's statement in that book, and he's linked it to the clam bake production. And he's indicating that at some time while they're making clam bake, that the Colonel gives Elvis a black limousine. And we might be seeing that black limousine here on screen in this picture. But the Colonel did not give Elvis this limousine for clam bake. The Colonel gave Elvis this limousine at Christmas just a few months before. So Christmas 1966. And it doesn't have any connection to any movie or Elvis's fortitude for getting through anything. It's a holiday gift. They exchange gifts at Christmas. They get each other extravagant gifts. And this is what the Colonel got him that year. He got him this Cadillac limousine, which was very thoughtful of the Colonel because Elvis loved Cadillacs. And of course, it was customized because the Colonel had it customized for Elvis. Priscilla Presley says the Colonel told Elvis that he should get Larry out of his life, that Larry used some sort of technique to manipulate his thinking. Elvis argued that this wasn't the case. He was truly interested in his readings. So Priscilla, she says that the Colonel is pushing Elvis to get Larry out of his life. And she said it many ways. She tells us what the Colonel said to Elvis to get rid of Larry. And now she's telling us that there were more discussions where the Colonel detailed out techniques that Larry used to manipulate his thinking. One of our commenters here on the channel mentioned They thought this might be connected to the words brainwashing, specifically communist brainwashing, because when Elvis goes to see Nixon in 1970 and writes Nixon a letter, part of the letter mentions communist brainwashing, that Elvis has been studying the techniques of communist brainwashing for quite a while. And they're thinking there might be a connection back to these techniques that the Colonel is warning Elvis about. Other people in other books at other periods of time, ones that we haven't looked yet together as a group, they also indicate that the Colonel talked about Larry and hypnotism, brainwashing, thought control, mind police, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of references to and comparisons of Larry to Rasputin, who people thought used mind control techniques on some of the czars of Russia. Not a very good comparison, but people kind of felt like Larry was doing something because none of the rest of the inner circle or Priscilla or the Colonel got anything out of the conversations that Larry and Elvis had. And yet Larry and Elvis would talk for hours and hours and hours. And they get really deep and esoteric. And they would talk about these ideas that they had read about. So they both have the framework of what they're talking about, but the people around them aren't willing to give them the time to explain the framework. They're not willing to read these frameworks on their own. And they don't like to listen to the discussions because they just mean nothing to them, because they just can't follow them. And therefore, Larry must be doing something to Elvis's mind, because Elvis is able to talk this language back and forth with Larry, but it seems to be gibberish to everybody else. And in some ways it is, because they're using words that everyone understands, but they're putting them together in ways that no one understands. And Marion says that Parker bought that car with his own money. Well, how Parker financed it, I have no idea. I would assume that from the money he made from Elvis, he then bought that vehicle and gifted it to him. But maybe he worked out a deal with somebody, and that car was part of the deal. There's no telling with Colonel Parker. He may have got the studio to purchase it and then just gave it to Elvis under his name. I have no idea. I just know that it's credited to him. And by that, I really mean a book has a picture of it, and then they have some text that goes with it, and it says, Colonel bought this car for Elvis in 1966 for Christmas. And then it's mentioned a few other places. And Linda Jewell is saying, I knew the guys didn't like Larry. He wasn't from the South. Yeah, they don't like anybody from California, really. Because people from California are strange. They're weird. They're hippies. And Larry was a hippie in the sense that he thought like a hippie, but more like a romanticized hippie, because Larry wasn't living a hippie lifestyle. Even before Elvis met him, Larry had long hair. Larry had crazy hippie looking clothes. But Larry's clothes were brand new, and his hair was washed and clean. And Larry woke up in a bed, and he probably took a shower that morning. And Larry had a place that he paid for and he lived in, and he had a wife and kids. And the kids went to school, and I don't know if the wife worked or not, but, you know, Larry had more of a white picket fence life, although it was an apartment. He lived in a city in an apartment, but he wasn't living a hippie commune lifestyle, and I don't think he would have lived a hippie commune lifestyle. Larry was happy with the luxury that money provided. And Larry made good money. Even before he met Elvis, he was making good money. Not the kind of money he made while he worked for Elvis, but he was making good money. So he had the romanticized thoughts of a hippie, but he wasn't practicing a lot of those. But he was practicing a few things that, you know, would make the Colonel nervous. Like illegal drug use, mostly, I would think, marijuana. And Colleen says, do managers normally play a role in the personal lives of their clients, or was that just the Colonel? So I would say that no, in most cases, the managers don't. This is a very special relationship. Most managers are going to have a lot of clients. Colonel has a single client. Colonel's entire career is tied into Elvis. Other managers can cut loose from one client or another. They have too much trouble with them. Colonel can't really do that. If he does, he has to go find a new client. The other guy does it. He just has to wait long enough for another guy to show up. But he'll still be making money. So Colonel, for his own self-interest, has to do some of these things. But we have to ask ourselves, was the Colonel interfering in Elvis's life at this point when he's laying down these rules? Or did Elvis lay down these rules and Colonel communicated and enforced them? It seems like it's probably the Colonel at this moment because Elvis was injured. But when Elvis gets well, he doesn't bring Larry back into the fold. He continues to keep Larry at arm's length. Now you could say that the Colonel got to him. You could say the Colonel had given him advice, and now Elvis had bought into it. But why did Elvis suddenly buy into this advice about the Colonel? Some people point to the concussion, say that he was of weak mind at the moment. But by the time a month later rolls around, I mean, he's not still of weak mind, but he's still not talking to Larry. So there's things going on here that are not reported in any of the books. If the guys knew what Larry had done, they would surely have put it in every one of their books. Larry's not going to put it in his book because it could possibly make him look bad. And it could be something that Larry did that Elvis really disliked, but Larry doesn't even know what it is. Or Elvis saw it the wrong way. Unfortunately, we just don't know. The only thing that we do know is the way that the guys around him saw it and the way Larry saw it. We don't even truly know how the Colonel saw it, because all we have is Priscilla telling us how the Colonel saw it, and we may even doubt that Priscilla was there or knew much about this. And Linda agrees that Colleen's question was great, which it was. That's a great question because we need to understand how the relationship between the Colonel and Elvis differs from the relationship between a normal manager and their client. The closest relationship that's really out there in the professional world at this point in time that you could compare Elvis and the Colonel to is Brian Epstein and the Beatles. Of course, he's got 4 clients, but they're one group client. And that's all he's handling. And Linda's asking, what did Larry do? That he would manipulate people's thinking? Yeah, I'm not sure. Hi, Jen. Thank you for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. And Larry Geller says, let's hear what he says, because he's going to talk about it. He says, one day shortly after work resumed, Elvis stormed into the trailer. Now, the trailer that Larry's referring to, I believe, is the makeup trailer. And that's where Larry mostly works, because that's where you do the hair. So one day, shortly after work, or this may be Elvis's personal trailer that he gets ready in and it's all for him. I think that's probably what it is. He has a personal trailer, and that's where they do his hair and makeup. Because surely he wouldn't get it done with everybody else. So Larry Geller says, one day shortly after work resumed, Elvis stormed into the trailer, and as he sat having his hair styled, he railed about what was wrong with the spiritual teachings. Elvis said, those darn masters, they're trying to control people's minds. That's what they're trying to do. He said darkly, they're trying to hypnotize people. They want to control you for their own purposes. They have motives. Larry describes Elvis angry, coming into the trailer to have his hair done. And while they're doing that normal ritual, Elvis begins complaining about the darn masters, those masters are the people who wrote these books that Elvis is reading, that Larry has brought him. So Larry has handpicked, by this point, hundreds of books. So I think it'd probably be hard to say that Larry had a very specific motive behind that, because he's brought Elvis trunks full of books. Be hard to have a consistent message and all that. But they're mostly written by people who are teaching this particular belief system that they're talking about in the book. And he goes through a whole lot of these spiritual teachings and belief systems. And Elvis is saying that what he's noticed is the same amongst all these teachings, is that they're trying to control people's minds, that there are ulterior motives behind why these people have written these books, that they believe their writings will hypnotize people, and whatever they've done to hypnotize those people, whatever they've told them to do, will serve motives, hidden motives of the authors. In other words, Elvis has read a whole bunch of these books, and he's been really into this quest and search with Larry, and he's now informing Larry, I believe this is all untrue. I believe it's been written for greed. People are gathering something, power or wealth or whatever it is, whatever their motive is. And that there's a good chance he's not going to abandon this, because he has seen through the fog of spirituality that they throw up in order to try to mask their true intentions. He's also kind of saying to Larry that, Larry, either you believe these things that they're saying, and therefore you are one of the hypnotized, or you see through this, but you fed it all to me. And then it's a betrayal. And Larry says that at one point during a tirade, Elvis stopped and then softly said, "Forgive me, don't take it personally, it's me." So I think that Larry, during this conversation, does not respond in a way that indicates to Elvis that he knew that these masters were lying. He probably continues to indicate that he believes in some of these teachings, that he follows some of these paths, that he thinks there is wisdom here. And that may convince Elvis that Larry is not one of these people with the ulterior motives. He's one of the hypnotized. And Elvis himself has been hypnotized for a few years until he's had this breakthrough. If this is a breakthrough. At this moment, he believes it is. And so he says to Larry, "Forgive me, don't take it personally, it's me." And Elvis is saying, "I see through what they're doing. You don't see through it yet. I see now that you brought me these things because you believe them to be true." And so I think Elvis has compassion for Larry in this moment, but Larry's no longer able to help Elvis on a spiritual quest or move him forward because Elvis now believes that what Larry's been bringing isn't the truth or isn't the path. Now, I don't know any of this. I'm just reading this out of what Larry's telling us. So if you have different opinions, feel free to put them in the chat, put them into the comments. All opinions are welcome here. And Linda's saying maybe just being from California is why they didn't like Larry, and that her dad made them lock the car doors when we did a road trip to California. Which is Linda said different times, but it was different times. And Linda's indicating that in a lot of the country back then, you could leave your car doors unlocked and you could leave your house unlocked, and theft was very uncommon. But it became very common during the 1960s in California, where there was a lot of hippies. That is true. And California has always been soft on crime in a political sense. So there tends to be a lot more crime in California. And Linda says that her dad did not like hippies, and that when they drove through Wyoming, she was terrified of Indians. Which is funny because obviously Native Americans as a threat have been gone for a long time. Long before any of us were born. And Linda says that she heard Red West interviewed once and he had that old-fashioned thinking my father did. That's an interesting comparison, Linda, and I would say that's absolutely correct. Red did think in a way that people would think of today as old-fashioned, but it's very similar to the way that Elvis Presley himself thought. They grew up together. Their families were very similar. I believe Elvis he'd moved well beyond Red in terms of his mental thinking and his, and I'm not saying Red was dumb by any means. I'm just saying that Red I don't think his world expanded as far as Elvis's did. That Elvis searched out a lot of knowledge that Red would have found to be worthless and unneeded and a waste of time. Now, Red, he knew a lot of stuff about physical things, and he had a lot of other talents. And so it's always interesting to compare Red to Elvis, to Sonny, to Marty, to George Klein. They're all reflections and refractions of each other in the times in Memphis. And Linda's saying that's true. Red and Elvis did grow up together. And that Elvis would have probably been more open-minded. And it's not even that he had more experience. You know, Red's and Elvis's experience of the world was very similar because they'd done so much of it together. But Red and Sonny and even Marty, I feel that they did not think in the mythic terms that Elvis thought and saw his own life. And I think Elvis was justified in seeing and thinking of his life in that manner, because when you look at his life, all kinds of things that we would associate with myths and legends actually happened to Elvis, and some have been lost into the mist of time, and some have been transformed into pillars of the current myth. But it's all there, and we've seen some of it in the timing of some of the events that we've looked at. But that brings us to the end of another episode. We've gone through a whole nother hour, and we've got Elvis and Larry in the trailer, and Larry's feeling like things aren't going well for him. And so we're going to talk more about clam bake and what's going to happen with Larry and what happens right after clam bake, which is going to be somebody's going to get married. But before I go, I'm going to leave you guys with a song. And this one will be Threads and Dreams. It's about the Circle G. And you all keep on taking care of business.
He wore a yellow shirt, black pants in the sun, rode horses through silence, then golf carts for fun. A ranch just 10 miles from the mansion's bright gate, where the myth met the morning and time learned to wait. George fixed the brickwork, the pipes in the ground, lit VP on shirt where no spotlight was found. Donna kept diaries, snapshots ahead of a father who labored, of a myth made by men. He didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a crown, just a place to be still when the world spun around. In the hands of the quiet, in the stitch of a seam, he carried the weight of a half-finished dream. The holster was worn, the leather was cracked, BP etched in thread, no glory attached. Mike shaped the saddle, the belt and the law, so Elvis could ride through a myth he adored. He didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a crown, just a place singing still, make the rest spun out. In the hang out the pride, the mistakes of his Snowstorms in March to fairgrounds at night. He chased peace in motion and shadow and light. And Priscilla saw him silhouette aglow, breathing in twilight, steady and slow. He didn't ask for gold.